what proportion of asymptomatic individuals actually transmit. So the way that we look at that is we look at, these individuals need to be followed carefully over the course of when they're detected and looking at secondary transmission. We have a number of reports from countries who are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases, they're following contacts, and they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare. And that much of that is not published in the literature. From the papers that are published, there's one that came out from Singapore, looking at a long-term care facility. There are some household transmission studies where you follow individuals over time and you look at the proportion of those that transmit onwards. We are constantly looking at this data, and we're trying to get more information from countries to truly answer this question. It still appears to be rare that an asymptomatic individual actually transmits onward.
Didn't seem like there's a whole lot of confusion inside of that statement. I mean, it sounds like she's really looking at, studies. She says, now I'm looking at things, and obviously she's privy to things we aren't, right? She's a head scientist at WHO or spokesperson. So what she's saying is behind closed doors, we're looking at these very in-depth studies by experts, some of them not published yet, but I'm sharing this information with you. And then she sort of doubles down at the end. But I mean, what we're looking at, it's rare. It's rare to see a spread by an asymptomatic carrier. But obviously, you can imagine what happened. What does Tony Fauci think about that? What is Bill Gates going to do? What are all these people that are pumping the fact that we're supposed to be terrified of being personally? Aren't I wearing a mask right now because I could be an unknown super spreader? I'm walking around healthy, but I could be carrying it, and possibly I'm going to get grandma killed. I mean, you see, this would destroy the entire world narrative, wouldn't it? I mean, what's the point of locking down? What's the point of a mask? I was shocked. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And then, all of a sudden, as we said, it flip-flops the very next day. Sort of not surprisingly. But then when I said, well, what did she actually say to correct it? Take a look at this. And you tell me, does this sound like a 180-degree correction? Here you go.
What I was referring to yesterday in the press conference were a very few studies, some 2 or 3 studies that have been published that actually try to follow asymptomatic cases, so people who are infected over time, and then look at all of their contacts and see how many additional people were infected. And that's a very small subset of studies. And so I was responding to a question at the press conference. I wasn't stating a policy of WHO or anything like that. I was just trying to articulate what we know. And in that, I used the phrase very rare. And I think that that's misunderstanding to state that asymptomatic transmission globally is very rare. What I was referring to was a subset of studies. I also referred to some data that isn't published. And this is information that we receive from our member states through either presentations that they give at member state briefings or presentations that are given to us through teleconferences. As you know, and as we've said previously, we convene global expert networks. And at many of those, we discuss a lot of ongoing research, ongoing studies that are there. And I was referring to some detailed investigations, cluster investigations, case contact tracing, where we had reports from member states saying that when we follow asymptomatic cases, it's very rare, and I use the phrase very rare, that we found a secondary transmission. What I didn't report yesterday was, because this is a major unknown, because there's so many unknowns around this, some groups, some modeling groups have tried to estimate what is the proportion of asymptomatic people that may transmit. And these are estimates. And there's a big range from the different models, depending on how the models are done, where they've done, from which country. But some estimates of around 40% of transmission may be due to asymptomatic. But those are from models. And so I didn't include that in my answer yesterday, but wanted to make sure that I covered that here.